Hi, I'm Jess and welcome to my channel, Reads of the Ravenclaw. Today I'm going to be filming my favourite video to film every year of the 2 years that I've had my channel, and that is my favourite books that I read in 2017. 2017 has actually not been like the greatest year for me reading wise. I definitely read more in the first half of the year than the second half of the year, although having said that, 2 of the books on this list are actually books I've read in the past week, so I'm hoping that that means that 2018 is going to be like a really good reading year and I've got on a bit of a roll. I'm really happy with all of the books I have here. I tried to narrow it down to 10, but I also have 2 honourable mentions, but I've got a real range of like poetry and non-fiction and novels, so I'm really looking forward to talking about all of them with you, and let's get with the list. So I'm going to start with my 2 honourable mentions, and the first one I have is a poetry collection, and that is Serious Concerns by Wendy Cope. I had to read one of these poems for my A-level. It was one of the poems that we got given in an anthology that we'd have to write on in the exam, and it was one of my favourite poems in that anthology. I really loved Wendy Cope's tone and style, so I thought I'd give the entire collection a go, and I loved it. Wendy Cope has such a kind of wry, flippant, dry tone. There's very little pretentiousness in her poetry, which I really like. I've been reading a lot more poetry over the past couple of years, and I've discovered that I don't like it when poems are artsy for the sake of being artsy. I feel like sometimes that can take away from the substance of the poetry. She talks a lot about modern relationships and love in the 20th, 21st centuries. I'm not quite sure when Serious Concerns was written. I think it was like early 2000s, and I just kind of love the cynicism that she approaches the poetry with, which is weird because I'm not a very cynical person, but there's something about reading all of her little like cynical thoughts that I really enjoyed. It's a really great collection of poetry, the tone is brilliant, it's quite easy to read, so if you're looking to read some more poetry, Wendy Cope is a really good place to start. It doesn't feel like poetry so much when you're reading it, it feels more like a series of very cleverly put together thoughts. So yes, I really enjoyed this one and I had to mention it even though it didn't make it onto the list. The second honourable mention I have is On Writing by Stephen King. Like so many people that enjoy reading and words and books, I really enjoy writing, and I thought that I should read some more books on writing. Stephen King is such an intimidating guy to me, and this book definitely kind of confirmed that. He's very firm in the way that he talks about writing. He's very much like, if you don't do it, you're not going to end up doing it. And I quite like that because I think it gave me a push, and I think it must give everyone who reads it a push to really dedicate themselves to getting some writing finished, to getting it locked down. I also really like the way that he went about structuring the book. There's quite a few autobiographical elements to it, which I really enjoyed. But yes, On Writing, another honourable mention, another really great book. Now we're on to my actual top 10 list. They're ranked from 10 to 1, 1 being my favourite, 10 being the least favourite of the favourites. And in 10th place is Seconds by Brian Lee O'Malley. Seconds is a graphic novel. I don't often read graphic novels, but I really wanted to, and I'd heard so many good things about this one, so I picked it up. Seconds is the story of a young woman called Katie who is a chef. Seconds is the name of her restaurant, but it also ties into the wider theme of the book, which is essentially about what would you do if you had the chance to do something over. The theme I think we've seen a lot in film, in books, in just popular culture in general, but there was something about this format and the way that this story was told that made it feel so fresh and original and quirky and unique. The art was absolutely gorgeous as well. It has these really beautiful colourful spreads, and all of the characters just have their, like, the way that they're drawn just makes them seem so individual, and it's just a beautiful book to read. And I don't often read graphic novels, as I've said, but this was structured in a way that made it just so easy and accessible, even though I'm not used to the format. And if any of you are looking into graphic novels or would like to read some more graphic novels or would like to be introduced to graphic novels, go for this one. It's really good. In 9th place is a book that I literally finished like 3 or 4 days ago, and I had to reorganise my entire list just so I could slot that in there, and that is The Boyfriend List by E. Lockhart. The Boyfriend List is about a young girl called Ruby Oliver. She's 15 years old, and right at the start of this, so it's not a spoiler, you find out that somehow over the past week or so she has lost all of her friends, become the social outcast at her school, and this is all somehow linked up, as it always is, with boys. This triggers panic attacks in Ruby, who starts seeing a therapist, and one of the things that her therapist suggests that she does is write the boyfriend list, which is a list of every boy that she has been romantically or even vaguely interested in, and then the novel essentially takes the form of Ruby going through this list and explaining what each boy meant to her. I feel like this book sums up everything that I love about YA and everything that is so brilliant about the YA genre, which for me is partially the fact that it looks at teenage life, it looks at the life of young people, and it doesn't trivialise it and it doesn't demean it in any way. It shows how serious and formative those years can be in a person's life. What I really loved about this one was how it took a theme that I think is really serious. I think it's a really interesting feminist debate, which is the impact of men on young women's lives and how their relationships with, men can form and all of that kind of gender dynamic. Yet she does it in a way that's still very entertaining without taking away from the weight of those topics. This was another one that I really loved the format of as well. There's loads of footnotes where she goes off on little tangents and they're really amusing and fun. So it was a really quirky format as well. I love this, highly would recommend it. In 8th place is some non-fiction, and that is I Am Malala by Malala Yousafzai. In 2012, Malala was shot on her way to school for protesting for the rights of female education, and this is essentially her telling of that story, her explaining how she led up to that moment and what's been happening since. Malala Yousafzai is one of my personal heroes. I remember sort of being made aware of her when I was maybe about 13 or 14 years old, maybe a bit younger because I think we're actually roughly the same age, and just being deeply horrified at the idea of a girl literally being shot, fighting for something that I had so easily and that my friends had so easily, and it's just something that I think is very deeply affecting. One of my favourite things about this was how down to earth Malala's voice was, how just very lovely and genuine she seems. I had the utmost respect and admiration for her beforehand, but I have even more after reading this and just seeing how well she's adjusted to everything. In 7th place is one of the biggest books that I read all year, and that is Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. I absolutely love the HBO TV show Game of Thrones, as so many people do. I think it's one of my favourite TV shows of all time. I can't believe we've got to wait until 2019. I might die. I might actually die. But to kind of deal with and satisfy some of my Game of Thrones withdrawal symptoms, I thought I would read the first book in the series, and I really enjoyed it. I'm definitely more of a character-driven girl than a plot-driven girl than a world-driven girl, and what I love about this fantasy is that every single character, and there are a lot of them, are really fleshed out. They're so well written, you can really distinguish them from one another. It's brilliant characters in a very thought out world, and I think George R.R. Martin's knowledge of his world and his plotting serves him incredibly well, as he is, one of the most famous, one of the most well-known fantasy authors alive today. In 6th place is another bit of non-fiction, very short, very quick read, and that is Dear Ijuwali, or A Feminist Manifesto in 15 Suggestions by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. So like I said, this is a bit of non-fiction, and it kind of takes the form of a letter. So one of Adichie's friends gave birth to a young girl, and she sent her a letter asking how she should raise this young girl a feminist, and this sort of little bind-up is essentially an edited version of Adichie's reply. And it's kind of what it says on the tin. It is 15 suggestions on how to, introduce feminism into the lives of young women, and in many ways it's quite a simple introduction to feminism, but all of the lessons are still extremely powerful. A lot of them are about knowing your self-worth, about giving yourself love. It's also written with such care. I really think that in every single word that Adichie chooses, you can see how much she truly cares about the raising of young women as feminists, and it is very inspiring to me. I love it. I love the way that she writes in this. I think it's really beautiful. Again, would highly recommend. In 5th place is a book that I don't have a physical copy of because I got it out of the library, but really do want to buy it because I'd love to reread it, and that is Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda by Becky Albertalli. Simon vs. the Homo Sapiens Agenda is about a high schooler called Simon who is gay but has not yet come out to his family and friends, although he is writing online little romantic emails to another boy. That is until somebody discovers these emails and everything gets extremely complicated. It sounds quite dark, and it definitely could have been a very dark book, but it was just a lovely warm hug of loveliness and adorableness and everything that is good and pure in the world. It was like kind of a teen comedy, and kind of early 2000s 19 teen comedy, and the sort of romantic comedy that you wish they still wrote but they don't, all smushed into one. It was so cute and it was so well done, and Simon's voice is easily one of the most vivid and endearing voices from a protagonist that I've read in a really long time. This book's also been getting loads and loads of attention. It's always got loads of attention since its publication, but it's getting even more now because it's going to be made into a film next year called Love, Simon. So now is a perfect time to read it if you have not. I absolutely loved it. Easily one of my favourite books of this year. In fourth place is a book that I actually had to read for uni and ended up loving, and that is Wide Sargasso Sea by Jean Rhys. It follows the character of Bertha Rochester before when she appears in Jane Eyre. I'm trying to work out if I can give spoilers for Jane Eyre or not. It's really hard to know with classics what you can and can't spoil. But basically it takes the character of Bertha Rochester and looks at her childhood and looks at how she becomes the character that she is in Jane Eyre, if she even is that character in Jane Eyre. I know that's very cryptic. I'm trying to like tread the line of classical spoilers. Jean Rhys has such a gorgeous poetic writing style. It's so evocative. You feel like you are in the Caribbean. It also deals with a multitude of very, very profound themes. It looks at race and identity and sexuality and mental illness. Yeah, I never really felt like Jean Rhys was preaching or out of her depth. She treated all of these themes with, I personally felt, a lot of respect and a lot of love for the figure of Antoinette. And if any of you have read Jane Eyre, you know that Bertha Rochester really just, she needs some love and care, and I feel like Jean Rhys respects her story, and just gave her the prequel that she really deserved, so I loved this. Now we are down to my top 3, and in third place is Emma by Jane Austen. This is the third Jane Austen novel that I've read. I've also read Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion, and I love both of them, but it took me quite a while to get through this, or to get to this, because I was intimidated by how massive it was. Emma is the story of a young, fairly well-off, slightly spoilt young woman called Emma Woodhouse who fancies herself a bit of a matchmaker, and unfortunately her matchmaking gets her into a whole lot of trouble. This book was so charming, and I really, really loved Emma Woodhouse. She's definitely the least nice of all of the Austen heroines that I've read so far, but that made her one of the most interesting Austen heroines I've read so far to me. I adored the romance. There has not yet been a Jane Austen romance that I don't love and don't secretly self-insert myself into. But yeah, this was absolutely brilliant, and if you're a Jane Austen fan and like me was slightly put off by the size of it, don't be. It's really, really good. Would recommend. In second place is a poetry anthology, which is kind of surprising to me because I love poetry, but it's rarely like my favourite thing. But this was one of my favourite things. But Stranger Baby by Emily Berry. Stranger Baby is inspired by the loss of Emily Berry's mother, and the poems on this really focus on the relationship between mothers and daughters. It focuses on grief and loss and healing, and it is one of the most beautiful and affecting pieces of literature I've read in a really, really long time. I am extremely close to my mother, and I always seek out mother-daughter relationships in literature. In general, parent-child relationships are something that just always get me in the feels. One of the recurring images in Stranger Baby is the sea. She compares herself to the sea, her mother to the sea. The sea is kind of this constant image, and I felt like for me that really added to kind of the mood of melancholy that surrounded this collection. It was a collection that just had such an atmosphere to it. It was melancholic, it was nostalgic, it was deeply, deeply sad, but also beautiful and rewarding. It was just a whole roller coaster of emotions in like a very short number of pages, and it's one of the few poetry collections that I've literally read from just cover to cover quite easily, because I do feel like there's a sort of link and narrative that you can very easily follow with this. I love this. I think it's probably my favourite poetry collection that I've ever read. Just gonna put that out there, and yeah, I would so recommend this if you're into poetry, even if you're not. Go for it. My number one book or books of this year are highly unoriginal, considering that half of this series also featured as the number one spot on my list last year, and that is the concluding 2 books in the Raven cycle quartet, Blue Lily, Lily Blue and The Raven King. I love this series. I cannot, rate this series highly enough. I think it is one of the most unique, well-written and just wonderful young adult series, one of the most wonderful, paranormal series to have come out in recent years. Maggie Steve Archer's books just have such a rich atmosphere to them. The atmosphere and the writing might as well be a character themselves, if we're honest, and the characters in this are pretty damn good too. I've never read a bunch of people who have not only been thought out so well as individual characters, but whose dynamics are also clearly so carefully constructed and put together and thought out. Yeah. Of course, The Raven Cycle had to be on my top 10 of 2017 list. It wouldn't have been an honest list without it. I loved it. So those were all of the books that I loved in 2017. I loved talking about them. I hope you didn't mind me rambling on about them for a very, very long time. I hope that you guys had a great reading year too, and I hope that 2018 is an even better reading year for you. So until next time, thank you for watching this video, and goodbye.